This podcast is a presentation of GSU's Digital Media Group. Visit us at dmgatl.com.
Okay, so this is Kelly Barraza. I'm the poetry editor for Underground Literary and Arts Journal from Georgia State University. Last week we had Charles Bailey on the show, but he couldn't work with us this week, so we have Nicole Motahari.
Hey guys, nice to meet y'all.
And this is our weekly poetry podcast. Name probably still in the works for it, possibly. Our podcast from last week is up on YouTube, and we'd really appreciate some feedback for it. Just visit DMGATL's YouTube channel, comment on it to see if you want any info on poetry, how to write poetry, or any sort of writing really, because I feel like poetry is something you can carry with you in all your life, not just when you sit down and write it out. So, Nicole.
Hey Kelly.
Hi. Do you have I want to ask you what is your knowledge of poetry like?
Okay, so I guess it started like anybody else. When we're little kids, we've got the whole AB rhyme scheme that they teach us, and kindergarten and going through high school. As I delved into creative writing, I joined the high school literary magazine, advanced to becoming an assistant editor, later editor-in-chief. So I started to get a lot into free verse, experimenting just a little bit here and there as I got into college, and I'm an English major with a Rec Comm concentration, so there wasn't as much time for creative writing as there was back when I was in high school, so it was a lot more focused on analysis. But then I got into literary theory courses, and so that's when the analysis really started to go on. I love the poem that you guys analyzed or spoke on last week, Evan Ballon's The Pomegranate, and that was really what started to get me back on track and, reading poetry here and there, writing a couple of really, really, really terrible
It always starts off really terrible.
Of course it does, every poet, they have their coffee shop stage where, we have that little notebook we carry everywhere, and it's like we're scribbling, and people ask us, what are you doing? It's just like, I'm making art. Don't disturb me.
I'm spilling my heart. Thank you, sir. I always save like everything I write, and it's always fun to go back to when you're like to like those files on my. So I open up a little folder on my computer, like, what's this from? Oh, I was 17. This is awful. Like, this is like trying so hard to be like a sonnet from the 1600s, and it's really bad. And I feel like that's a real big misconception. People first get into poetry or any sort of writing, they think, oh, good poetry is sounding like Shakespeare all the time, but when you experiment, I think it really...
Yeah, I definitely agree. even Shakespeare had to start somewhere, and most people thought his poems were rubbish at first, and, as he got better, now we have Tom Hiddleston reading it on, if you go on SoundCloud, you see the comments like, oh, my ovaries exploded. Tom Hiddleston's reading Shakespeare. No, I think the funny thing is my mom actually, she kept all my old actual, back in high school, you used to write notes and all this stuff. She's kept a box full of my actual paper. So we were cleaning up the other day, and I looked at him just like, what's this? She's just like, oh, it's some of your old work. And I just look at him just like, did I ever really write this?
I know, it's a humbling thing.
No, actually, I've got a question for you as a poetess. Do you prefer to actually physically write with pen and paper or type it up?
I handwrite everything I do before I ever type it, but I end up typing because whenever I get onto a computer, it just makes me want to retype it a million times. But I do the same when I write by hand. That goes with any sort of writing, whether it's a short story or a poem or an essay. But and what I often do too is I put notes into my phone because I'm always on my phone, right? Because I'm a mess, and I just all my notes are filled with grocery lists and then some random line that I made up, this is a good line for a poem, and I just put it in there next to bananas, and I'm like, yeah, that's good. I have a lot of scraps of paper in my room somewhere. I'm like, what's this? Oh yeah, I forgot about that. But I like writing by hand because I feel like it's almost like a religious thing. This is people who like do like, it's almost like speaking in tongues. So it's like writing in tongues. You sit there and you just write free form style, and it's fun because you can like unlock a lot of stuff that way.
I definitely agree with you. I think one of the programs that I find really helpful on the computer, I just got a new laptop, so it's still exploring the wonders of touchscreen and all this cool gadgets and everything. But Microsoft OneNote lets you make different little notebooks, quote unquote. I'm making air quotes, listeners, if you can see them. So it allows you to create different notebooks in and of themselves and different pages. So I have like a notebook for each of my subjects, and then I just have a notebook for creative writing stuff, and I just go, and it's like word vomit, where I just like toss it up on the page. But the good thing is that way I never lose it. I never have to worry about, like a really brilliant idea that I had, and you look back and it's just like, oh, I can't read my own handwriting. So that's been pretty helpful for me.
Yeah, I don't know. It always amazes me people don't write out their stuff sometimes, but everyone has their own thing, whether it's through paper, whether it's through just computer or a mix of both, or however. I always end up writing mine. Well, I'm supposed to be taking notes for a different class too. I'm like, I can't do this. I doodle a lot too. I'm not the most attentive student, but at least I'm there.
It's like it's better to be there and somewhat listening than not there.
Yeah.
It's like at least you hear the professor when he's just like, this question will be on the test, and then your ears perk up. It's just like, okay, I might want to tune in.
Exactly. Do you ever find yourself writing about stuff you like hear, like in just other classes other than like English courses? I do that all the time.
Oh yeah.
You can always tell like what class I'm taking by what I'm writing a lot. Like last semester, like there's a lot of poems about astronomy specifically in a weird way.
Oh God, I think mine last semester was probably I took an epidemiology course, which is basically infectious diseases with Dr. Dix in the bio department, because I'm a bio minor. And what I didn't know going into it was that basically Dr. Dix named it that way so the university would pass the course, which is really STDs for college kids. So
Important.
Oh yes, very important. I think everyone should take the class. But you would get a lot of like random doodling in the margins about like the idea of somebody having AIDS or I don't know, a poet or somebody having syphilis, and then it kind of just gets your mind whirring. Actually, it inspired my current graduation with distinction project, which is taking a look at the societal perspective on AIDS and the LGBTQ society. But so yeah, I think science classes can be rather inspiring.
Yeah, it's cool. I always I end up doing so much research for like the dumbest thing, like for like the dumbest thing. Today I wrote a short story. For my senior seminar class, and it was like we had to do a 1-sentence short story in 500 words. It had to be grammatically correct, right? And I've done 1-sentence short stories before, and they can be tricky, but it was like a page and a half that had to be 1 sentence, right? And I was like, well, I don't know how I'm going to do this. So I ended up writing it about a woman who watches TV all day and escapes into her TV a lot.
That's interesting.
And I'm doing so many okay, what exactly happens on The Price is Right? Like, how can I make this, dramatic for her?
It's like, what is the metaphorical message behind The Price is Right? Is it consumerism in America, or class differences, or capitalism and the effect it has on the everyday person and how TV rots your brain?
Yeah, and I like morbid things, too, because I know whenever my boyfriend opens up my laptop, sometimes I'll have tabs up for lists of epidemics on Wikipedia, and I'm like, it's important to know when they happen,
No, I think epidemics are a writer's best friend. Disease is a writer's best friend. As terrible as that sounds, it all started with, tuberculosis, and that was one of the most romantic ways of killing somebody off. Or a fever, your heroine goes out in the rain and she's crying and desperate, and then she catches a fever, and oh no, she withers away and dies this beautiful, dramatically tragic death. And then, nowadays we have cancer, which can be pretty metaphorical in and of itself, cancer of the heart, or I mean not the heart, but leukemia, blood cancer. What does that imply? Kind of Richard III-esque, how he was deformed. He had a hump, and that was metaphorical for how he was twisted on the inside. So I think diseases in literature can say a lot about a character or a person.
Yeah. I always use these. They're always so much fun to like talk about. Not talk about, but there's so many ways to make it artistic and like, because it's like, oh, it's awful, but let's make it beautiful in a kind of way.
It's like, though I don't think that anybody can make like syphilis or
no, that's not the
oozing
sexiest
pus.
disease. If anything, it's the opposite. Yeah. Diseases are so much fun to write about. Plagues, all that kind of thing. Serial killer. I've never written a story about a serial killer yet, but I want
Really?
to. I'm like
Oh my
obsessed with them in a
God.
weird way.
I think it would be really interesting to take it like from the mind of a serial
Yeah.
killer. I mean, as horrible as it sounds, it's just like I wonder what it would be like to actually like be able to sit down and like interview one, and then try to get it from the inside out and do all that research to get into somebody's mind like that. It's
Yeah.
creepy.
It makes you think. I only watched the first episode, but I want to get into it. That Making of a Murderer show. Everyone's
I've
like,
seen
you gotta
that.
watch it. You gotta watch it.
It's like, I'm not a huge horror or murder fan, but I've been watching American Horror Story, and I usually go like one season. I do seasons, and I binge watch one show until I finished it. So on my Netflix, you see like all these horror show recommendations, and the Making of a Murderer is one of them. My mom pops up behind me, and she's just like, What are you watching? It's like there's somebody's pancreas being torn out.
Yeah.
Is this like the best thing for you to be watching? I'm just like, it's all for the sake of art. I'll write an analysis on it at some point.
I know. I'm a huge horror film fan. Like I'm huge into it. Like I think
Really?
28 Days Later is one of my absolute favorite movies. I think it's so brilliant.
I've never seen it.
It's scary. It's a
God.
scary movie.
It sounds scary. I think that horror movies can be wonderful if they're well made because they have so much, I guess, what's the word for it? Potential. I feel to make statements on society, on individuals, on concepts and themes that we find ourselves surrounded with on a daily basis. But I was having this conversation with a friend the other day. It seems that nowadays horror has seemed to gone towards gore for the sake of gore. The bloodier the better.
Yeah, gorn, like porn, but for gore. No, it's a word. It's a word.
It's true. It
Yeah.
makes sense.
There's some movies where I think the gore is definitely warranted, or it's just goofy and funny. Like any Tarantino movie, like Hateful Eight, that was just a mess. It's kind of goofy though, so you can't really take it seriously. But like, yeah, I'm not a big into gore either. Ugh, it's the grossest. But yeah. It's funny what people think of as I'm going off of poetry now, but you know what? I'm gonna come back to it eventually. Talking about one of the most poetic movies I've ever seen. Honestly, is called Eyes Without a Face.
Really?
Les Yeux Sans Visage, 1960 French film, black and white, about a woman who loses her face. It's gorgeous.
It sounds really just.
She wears like a mask the whole movie. It's cool. It's
No,
super
I mean,
cool.
I'm just wondering like what that means because the whole concept of the gaze of the camera and how that can be used.
Oh, it's a scathing critique of a misogyny.
Oh.
It really is. Girl loses her face. Her father, who's like a doctor, keeps her. Oh, she's dead. But really, he just kidnaps women and steals their faces to try to put it on her face.
Oh, ew.
And it's gory, but it's like 1960s gory, so it's not
Exactly.
really gory.
Right.
But evidently it like freaked people out a lot back in 1960, and it got banned in a lot of countries, which is amazing to me because it's just picture that compared to like Hostel or something.
Oh, no. I watched Hostel, and that's kind of ruined traveling student-wise to hostels because I love the idea of traveling abroad and all this. And then I have friends who are just like, oh, well, as a student, you can travel really, really cheaply. If you just stay in hostels, I'm just like, no, not staying in a hostel. That's not going to happen.
Airbnb all the way.
I think if we're on the subject of poetic horror, I'm a huge Hitchcock fan myself.
He's amazing.
Vertigo, Psycho, of course.
The Birds.
The Rear Window. Is it Rear Window?
I think it's Rear Window.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think Hitchcock had a very unique way of looking at things and using both the camera and the perspectives of individual characters to convey his messages. I think that's why he was so controversial.
Yeah, he was a jerk, but he was also brilliant. Like, that's kind of the deal with a lot of people, though. But like, I love when you sit down and watch any interview with him on YouTube. There's like a bazillion because he loves talking about it. He really kind of talked about like the craft of filmmaking, like, oh, this shot here, this angle here, and to me, it totally reminds me of just poetry and writing and just creating art, because you think of like the way you break a line, or if you put a comma in as opposed to a dash, or a word play, that kind of thing. That very much to me mimics like what people do with like filmmaking and stuff.
And I mean, with poetry, we always have to be conscious of, because it's not just the written word, it's also meant to be spoken. So a lot of times, like when I'm writing poetry, it's like I'll read it out loud to myself. I'm just like, how do I want the reader to say it, whether it's in their head or spoken word. With actual books and stuff, we don't have as much worry about how it's going to quote unquote sound to the reader, but with poetry, it's a very verbal art.
Yeah, spoken word. I think it helps with anybody, even if you're like writing prose or like a short story or something, or a book. Like reading it out loud to yourself, even if it's not meant to be read out loud, can help you so much, because you can realize, oh, this is an awkward sentence, and I don't think it's meant to be awkward. I remember a few issues ago, I think it was the fall issue of Underground, 2014, maybe the spring issue, had a friend stage named Oak Morse, who's like a model and like the quietest dude in class, but he's almost like a mini celebrity. I don't know. That's his stage name, Oak Morse, and he's a spoken word artist, and he performed one of his poems at a release party here on campus, and it was like the most amazing thing, and I like almost cried listening to him. And it was like a 3-minute long, like it was like a little play almost, and it just made me think, because I remember when I read it on the page, I'm like, well, this is okay. I don't know why it got published, but it almost makes you think, like, I wish some poems they had like little things at the front that said, oh, to be spoken, or something, just so people remind. Because I think sometimes people don't think, well, not people don't think, but people who aren't as familiar with poetry and stuff, they don't automatically think, oh yeah, I should read this out loud to myself, because people like to read silently, and that's something that's like, it's so weird, because I remember in taking a medieval literature class right now, and they said that back in like the early medieval times, 1300s, whatever, that's actually late medieval anyway, reading itself, like silent reading, was not a thing. No one did that. No one did it. Like, it was like a communal, everyone read aloud from like their illuminated stuff, and it was like, I wish that we could return to that. I feel like people should stop talking about silent reading as much and just sit there and just read a book. Like a Jane Austen novel. Just read a book aloud for leisure. I'm like, why not?
I mean, I think that's why we have audiobooks nowadays. But again, that's individualizing the experience rather than bringing it together. And I think readings, there aren't many readings anymore, which I think is really a shame, because I think one of the unique perspectives is how an author creates their work. And, I think they're one of the very few people who the question comes up, is the author's way the only correct way? Or when you put your baby out into the world, there are different interpretations of what you thought was, oh, I'm the author, so this is what my poem means. Whereas you write a poem and you put it out into the world, and once you put it out there, people are just like, oh, well, I see this symbolism and this metaphor and this, and you might have thought that you're just writing about going grocery shopping, and they're just like, oh, this is a metaphor for like the struggle of the everyday working class college student. And it's just like, well, I never thought about that, but if you want to make it like that,
a poem has several hats.
Exactly.
Put them all at different times, yeah. Let's see, what else? Do we want to read a poem?
I think we should.
You can read a poem. Okay, so this poem I found this in New South, which is the graduate journal run by graduate students at Georgia State. This is their adventure issue, and I kind of love it because it's gorgeous, right? And also, because it's super fun, and also because it's the last issue by that had editor-in-chief Jenny Mary Brown, who is a wonderful woman. And,
she's great.
And who was also my first creative writing instructor here at GSU for Intro to Poetry class. And she helped me workshop a poem that ended up getting published in a national journal. So
that's pretty awesome.
I love her. I don't think she's here with us anymore, but this isn't her poem, but it's in the journal that she kind of helped curate a little bit with the help of others. So this poem is called Funeral Train by Emily O'Neill. I'm going to try and read it the best I can, but it's a fun poem. Okay. I told you no white or diamonds or knees or endless. I wanted red and Reno, and you were determined to lie until the sun set on us welded together at the knuckles. Remember how you wanted to propose in public, and once the yes was wrung from the clapper at my lips, a wedding would erupt from the frozen ground like a torrent of horses trampling me into you, making us a single sadness, punctured moon wrapped around my finger, button through buttonhole. I was gathered by my own fear into a bouquet, posy for the bone wake. Who will hold me if not the dead, and only when they're forced? I can never marry a ghost, but I'll marry grief if it keeps me my own. If I can, I'll climb to the attic and never descend again. I left you undressed. I left you alone whenever you asked. God forbid I get my own forest of white pines. God forbid anyone else demand all this forested rage. I wouldn't know what organ to play or how to spill across the keys of anything as a song. Carry me singing. Carry me low, long, low whistle. Train won't stop long enough to take on passengers. I'm waving white flag. Handkerchief passing through smoke. I love you. Let go of the window. I'm already a new city.
Oh my God. Sorry, it's like a moment of silence for the depth of that poem.
I think that opening line is like the greatest thing. It's like, I told you no white or diamonds or knees or endless. Like,
I know. I mean, it's just, I think it's really interesting, actually, because I think that so many young women today are facing that same struggle. Because society tells us, grow up, get an education, get married, have kids, live happily ever after. That's the idea that's been driven into our minds since, I mean, I grew up, at least, watching the Disney princess movies. And it's, you know, you meet your Prince Charming and you get married. Getting married is your happily ever after. But nowadays, there's so much more to life than having a big rock on your hand that marks you as property of someone. I always thought it really interesting that men don't get engagement rings, women do. Women are given away at their weddings, and, you know, we might not think twice about it. But society still views women to an extent as chattel. I mean, you are owned once you are married. And I think that poem goes into a lot of, I mean, especially with the starting line, to me it sounds like, you know, the typical bridezilla of the 21st century. You know, I don't want this, I told you I don't want this and this and this and this. Does marriage make monsters of us all? And do you lose your identity once you are married? Because you are no longer you. You are a part of something larger. I was talking to a friend about a study abroad trip, and I said, "Are you coming?" He said, "No, I can't. I'm married. I have to stay at home. I have to support my family." I mean, they don't have any kids yet, but it's still a manner of family. Being single, you don't have to have anybody's permission to go out and do whatever you want. I mean, to an extent, not breaking the law or jumping off a roof without a bungee cord or anything too crazy. But when you are married, you lose part of being just you. If I can take a look.
yeah, let me get this page here.
There we go. I think it's really interesting because it says, remember how you wanted to propose in public, and once the yes was wrung from the clapper at my lips, a wedding would erupt from the frozen ground. You know, we don't necessarily think about what's the difference between a wedding and a marriage, really. Because a wedding is a big, fun party with roses.
Big,
and
fun, expensive party.
I know, big, fun, really expensive party. Anything you put the name wedding on, automatically, like, the price jumps. Exactly. Like, I'm planning friend's wedding, and one of the pieces of advice that I found on the internet is, like, don't tell the caterer it's a wedding.
I've totally heard that.
It's like, tell them it's just a really big party, because when you say the name wedding, it's a
like $3,000 on there.
Exactly. It's a capitalistic opportunity for people to milk the event for what it is. But yeah, so the pressure of somebody proposing in public, I mean, nowadays, usually you've spoken about it or the idea, but still, if you're not ready, it's still pretty impossible to say no in public. You are left with no choice but to say yes, and to break off an engagement is like cutting off an arm. It's viewed still in modern times, when women are supposed to be individuals who are independent and strong and intelligent. It's still somewhat of a societal taboo. And then it says, so a wedding would erupt from the frozen ground like a torrent of horses, trampling me into you, making us a single sadness. Punctured moon wrapped around my finger, button through buttonhole. I was gathered by my own fear into a bouquet, posy for the bone wake. So I think that really talks about the pressure that women feel. You know, we are told that the whole biological clock concept, she's gathered by her own fear into a bouquet. It's not even the pressure from other people. It's the own pressure from...
It's internalized.
It is.
Yeah.
It is internalized into when is my expiration date.
Expiration date / funeral.
Exactly, / funeral. So making us a single sadness, it goes back to, do you lose your identity? Do you lose who you are when you're married? I could never marry a ghost, but I'll marry grief if it keeps me my own. If I can't, I'll climb to the attic and never descend again. So, I mean, the attic, upstairs, up and retreating into her own mind, into her individualism. I know I'm like...
Makes you think of
beating
Jane
the
Eyre.
topic. I know, it does.
Like, I'm a hidden wife in the attic.
Exactly. It's like a stereotypical, and the association with the craziness.
Yeah.
You know, you keep the crazy people locked up in the attic because, you know, they're dangerous and they can make weird changes
It's like where you
to this world.
Yeah, it's like where you put like your old, very valuable paintings, you know, to collect dust.
Exactly. And I mean, even that in itself, old valuable things are still there, almost like having a wife to put on a shelf and keep her there, keep her in a glass case, say, yes, this is my wife at societal events, but does that make her any more yours than a doll that you would own and take out when your friends come over and say, yes, I own the latest whatever, I don't know, American Girl doll or something. God forbid I get my own forest of white pines. God forbid anyone else demand all this forested rage. I mean, it's a matter of... The white pines is really interesting to me because white is... Yes, it's a wedding color. It's supposed to represent purity and innocence. But then if we're going back to the beginning, she said, I told you no white or diamonds. I wanted red and Reno. And red is the color of passion, of independence, of blood, even the hot, fiery blood running through her veins, wanting to break free of everything.
I love that red and Reno. It's so like, it's such a like, no, I'm not going to accept this like standard of, oh, let's go get married in this typical fashion. Everyone can see it. So like, she's like, no, if you want to be together, it has to be in a way that's more true to who we are, you know. But I think, and I love how she conflates kind of like the idea of these milestones in your life, wedding, funeral, you know. That's amazing to me because that's sometimes you think about that, like, oh, you've hit this one marker, you graduated school, oh, you hit the next marker, you get married, then children, and then what? You retire, then you die. You know,
it's very sad.
It's like how do we mark our lives? It's like that Rent song.
Yes. Well, actually, I did an analysis on that, so you're heading right up my creek. And then life and death are so closely intertwined, and then
To speak of one, to speak of the other, Harry.
um,
I always think of these lines, and I'm like, I'm like, that's a cool line. What's that from again? Like, oh yeah, Harry Potter. Oh God, it's so good. And then I just
like it is
my
so
shower
good.
thoughts, like, yeah, that was a good line. Good one, Joanne.
No, I think with me, it's a matter of like taking those and trying to convince people. Yes, this is actually like literature. I can make a living off this. I promise. Like J.K. Rowling did it. I can too. It's interesting. She says, "Carry me singing, carry me long low whistle." It kind of reminds me a little bit of a New Orleans funeral because in a New Orleans funeral, they're rather different because most people look at a funeral as a time to mourn, a time for sadness and sorrow. And, we look at weddings as a time to rejoice. But I think she takes that standard and she flips it over here into the New Orleans way of a funeral being more of a celebration of life. And it's
all the brass and stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
And a train won't stop long enough to take on passengers. I mean, it's the train life. We get on at one stop, and at one point, we have to get off. She says, "I'm waving, white flag, handkerchief, passing through the smoke. I love you. Let go of the window. I'm already a new city. She's already gone." He thinks that he has her. He thinks that he has her love. He owns her. But she's already, even if it's not physically, mentally, emotionally, she's already gone. She's left him, and the people who are clinging on, they're holding on to nothing. They're holding on to a handkerchief or a window, but there's already a barrier in between them.
Yeah, I love the transience of it, the whole train. I mean, I take a lot of buses and trains everywhere, so I'm always just taking public transit and whatever. But so I love that idea of like, you're on the train, you're leaving, and also like already a new city. The city, that's just so good. That's such a good final line. Like so much. I love it. I'm just into it.
No, I think, oh God, that's really just gorgeous. And I mean, again, times are changing. Women used to be married by the time they were 14, 15 years old. Look at Romeo and Juliet. And then it changed to 20s, your early 20s, and now a lot of women are waiting until they're 30 or even older to get married. And I think that really says something about society and how we're evolving, the whole feminism thing.
It definitely speaks to the shift.
I know.
Yeah, I just love that poem. I've been thinking about it a lot. I think about there's always like a poem that sticks with me a lot. I'm like, God, so good. How do you do that? I want to do it. How do you do it?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely identify on a personal level with it because I come from a Persian family background. So the idea there has always been, you grow up, you get the education, and then in the course of the education, you meet a nice boy and you settle down. And that's what I really thought that I wanted until quite recently when the opportunity presented itself. And then there's that moment of sheer panic of thinking, I don't want to be tied down. Why should I have to bind my life to somebody else? I mean, even if despite no matter who the person is, to some level, you are held accountable. You are held responsible for another being. I mean, no, it's not like having children where you're physically, responsible for taking care of the child until they're old enough to take care of themselves. But, a wife to a husband, if she wants to go out, it's just like, oh, hey, honey, I'm going here with the girls. Or a guy to his wife, it's just like, oh, I'm just going out with the guys. It's a matter of having to check in, of having to, I guess, consolidate isn't quite the right word, but a merger of sorts. And the question is, what becomes lost in the merger? What compromises have to occur? What do you have to give up? Once you're tied down, they talk about it as in settling down. as if you have your wild years and you're supposed to do all your exciting things, but they're just like, oh, when are you going to grow out of this? Or when are you going to grow out of that? And growing up doesn't seem to be as much fun as it did when you were a kid. When you were a kid, it's just like, oh, when I'm grown up, I get to do this and this and this and this. And now it's, oh, I'm grown up. I have to do this and this and this and this. I mean, I'm 22. I still find myself saying, oh, when I grow up. And then I realize, well, I am grown up. At 10, you thought that 13 was the height of everything. I'm a teenager. Then it was your 20s. I'm 21. I can drink now. I can do fun things and exciting things. And then you just realize, just because you have new privileges, it also brings a lot of responsibilities onto your back. I mean, you're expected to get an education. You go graduate, get a degree. What happens after you get a degree? Well, now you have to get a job. As you were saying, what happens after a job? Marriage and kids and retirement. And you're not supposed to do fun things anymore. You're not supposed to go out and do something reckless and crazy because you're supposed to be grown up and mature. So I think society's perspective kind of has to shift on that as our generation grows older, as we are more and more fond of our independence, less willing to let go, less willing to compromise our fun and our independence and our perspectives for a life of settling down in 9-to-5 jobs and meatloaf dinners, the whole 50s lifestyle.
Grossest thing in the world. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for anyone who loves meatloaf, but I don't understand it. I think my sister made it once. She's like started pouring milk in with like beef. I'm like, what the hell is this? God. I don't know what this is. This should not be.
Never plan.
This is not kosher. I don't care what it is.
Oh God,
yeah.
that's funny.
I mean, yeah. I think delaying all these kind of things that people use, like it's like the train in the poem. Train doesn't come at an exact hour at certain times of day, just like your life. The events come at a certain time every day, but we aren't afraid to delay it or to expect delays.
Though the thing is, once you miss the train, you've missed it. Like it was talking about leaving passengers who still haven't gotten on. You are left behind in life. Your friends get married, you become the odd one out. Your friends have kids and you don't, and suddenly there's all these, I guess, play dates and this, and you're out of the loop because you don't have kids. If you're not doing what's expected of you by that certain time, you lose the opportunity. And whether you eventually want it or not, it's still a different course that your life will take.
Yeah, that's something. Yeah, and like time itself too. It's like, well, you have to be on time for things. Life is sort of speeding up. I know I took this film theory class, and it was talking a lot about just stuff I do not understand. And it's like economics, all this stuff. And I'm like, this is a film class. Why are we talking about economics? But it's all relevant. And talking about how contemporary life is evidently, air quotes, speeding up, accelerating. Accelerationism is a big hot topic in movies. Things are just constantly. Any Michael Bay movie, like an action movie from the 90s, compared to the amount of cuts and breaks in the film, is a lot less rapid than like a Michael Bay movie today, right? And how we're running out of time. You have to get a job. You have to get the next job. You have to get this, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera,
Like you got to get that promotion.
It's all just a driving force of like, almost like they're talking about capitalism and how it's a very inhuman system to the human machine, and soon the human machine, our bodies will be obsolete compared to like actual machines, And
even the advances that are being made today. I mean, they had Google Glass, and I heard something yesterday about how now they're like in the works of creating Google Contacts.
What's that?
It's like Google Glass, except it's like a contact lens that you wear, and it's just like how soon until we're gonna have like these things implanted in our brains or something.
That makes you think of Black Mirror. You seen Black Mirror?
No, I haven't.
That's one you got to see. Yeah, I recommend. That's a poetic thing. I love that show. I mean, it's kind of dumb also, but it's kind of dumb but kind of smart.
It's like it makes me think a little bit about that old movie AI, Artificial Intelligence. Yeah. Like that thing always made me cry. But, you know, how soon is it going to be until not even test tube babies, but like robot babies? It's just like, oh, we can't have a kid. Oh, it's okay. We're just going to like order one out of a catalog. Because, of course, ordering one
Like
out of a
Gattaca.
catalog. Oh, God. Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like, that's crazy.
I watched a short film today by Don Hertzfeldt. Do you know he did like the Rejected short? It's like a lot of little hand drawn guys.
I think I've
It's
seen.
like my spoon is too big. You know, it has all these like quotes from the '90s, and he had a new one that just got nominated for an Oscar. This is his first.
Oh.
He's been making stuff for a long time, like 15, 20 years, since he was like our age.
Right.
He got nominated for an Oscar when he was our age or younger
God.
for animation.
The pressure of that.
And I'm like, oh, come on, you know? Like, and his is his first one that's been nominated in a long time, and it's amazing. It's on Netflix. It's called
Okay.
World of Tomorrow, and it's about like a little girl who gets visited by her future great-granddaughter who has all her memories, because every generation they implanted new
Oh my
memories.
God.
But it's also kind of hilarious, but also very sad, which is all of his movies, right? I don't know how to explain it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm just wondering about that. Then does that mean if you have everybody's memories in you from like this generation on, do you still make mistakes? Do you make the same mistakes that your great-great-grandmother made? Do you see how your life could have gone differently if they had made one choice? Do you resent them for the choices that they've made? It's just like, no, don't be dumb. Don't drink that, because you don't know what's in it. You don't know that's gonna like mess up your kid who's gonna be my parent, who's gonna be abusive, who's gonna do this. It's like, to what extent is living with the past
It's
a good thing?
Yeah, it's good. It's so good. I'm sorry, I can't even. I don't want to spoil. I'm such a spoiler when it comes to movies. I'm like, let me tell you the ending because it's beautiful, and it's like, don't spoil it. I'm like, but it's great.
It's like when I rant about movies.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that drives me crazy. It's like I'll try not to spoil it, and then it's like I went to see The Danish Girl.
Oh, how's that?
Oh, it was amazing. I mean, there's a reason why it's nominated for like 4 Oscars, I think. But they did something with the ending that I didn't like, and I was sitting there in the theater, and I was like yelling at the screen. I was just like, "No, what are you doing? This is not supposed to happen."
Eddie, how you do me like that?
Exactly. It's not even Eddie. I was yelling at I was yelling at my mother because I was just like, the author should not have let this happen. How can the author just sit by and let this happen? And then it's just like, well, they sold the rights. That's what happened. He's like, no, you can't do this. It's like, how often do we end up like yelling at it? So I was talking to a friend, and I was just like, I can't believe they did this. He's just like, well, thanks for spoiling the movie.
Oh yeah, I get so mad at every movie. I superanalyze everything. Like my favorite movie from last year, nobody saw it. It was called Kimiko the Treasure Hunter. Exactly. No one saw it. Anyway, and it was like it was about a young woman from Japan who thinks the movie Fargo is real.
Oh.
And she goes to North Dakota to find the buried money in it that I think Steve Buscemi's character buried in the movie or something like that in the middle of North Dakota. And it's based off a true story of a woman who Japanese woman who flew out to like North Dakota or whatever and ended up dying in the wilderness.
Oh, God.
Right? But the movie itself is like this really beautiful artistic thing, and to me it's also against like our patriarchal sort of culture, you know, in a very indirect, but to me it was very obvious. It's very much like a Red Riding Hood sort of story, because she has this really cool red like hoodie with like this big cape, and it looks like Red Riding Hood, which has roots in
red hoodie with a cape.
Yeah, it's actually a motel blanket, but she uses it as a cape, and it looks awesome, right? And
It's like yay for great costuming.
And then like I left the movie theater. I think it was at the Plaza. I think.
Oh, the Plaza is so much
The one that
fun.
plays like
Rocky
four-
Horror.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I love. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I haven't seen that in the theater yet, but I really want to.
Oh my god! I think they're doing. I think they're doing like a sequel to Rocky Horror or
Nah,
something.
they should do that,
There's.
though.
I don't know. I know. Tim Curry is like jumping in. It's like nowadays I'm afraid to go on my Facebook because I'm afraid to see who's died.
I know.
It's like George R.R. Martin is in charge of 2016. And it's just like every day this past week, somebody different died. I was just like, what are you doing, 2016? It's like, go home, 2016. You're drunk.
I know. Like the first day back in classes, I was like, yeah, first day back in classes. And I was like, I think I was at orientation for my internship at the wonderful Marta. And like on the way, I was like, oh man, David Bowie died. I'm like, oh, it's terrible.
It's like, that's
and
how,
like,
and then a couple of days
and then-
later, it was just like, Alan Rickman died. I'm just like,
Yeah.
I cried for like a good half hour when Alan Rickman died. And I was just like, that can't happen. So I vented my feelings into writing, and in my Tales from the Con page, which will soon be made into a podcast. So if you guys like Alan Rickman, if you guys like Severus Snape, then listen to our upcoming podcast, Tales from the Con, which you can read the stories at talesfromthecon.wordpress.com. # plugging myself. So yeah, I was a mess. And then the lead guitarist, I think, from the Eagles died yesterday.
Yeah.
And I was just like, I thought we made a deal 2016. You stop killing people, and I try to make, like, A's in classes.
I did see a joke. It was terrible, but kind of great.
What?
It was like, okay, David Bowie and Alan Rickman died at 69. And then they posted like Donald Trump's age. He's 69.
I know.
And I'm like,
oh my God.
fingers crossed. Like, oh my God.
It's like I have
No ill will, but all the ill will.
I know. It's just like not ill-willing people, but it's like I made a resolution to not talk about politics. But let me just say that if Donald Trump wins, I'm going to move to England because I will not live. I cannot live in America that way. It's just like
If Donald
no.
Trump's hair becomes president.
Oh
That's
my God.
presidential hair right there.
I think the presidential. I think if his hair became
Presidential
president,
do.
it would be much better.
Watch it have like a
than him.
cohesive economic policy.
It's like Donald Trump's hair should have its own like Twitter page or something.
I'm sure it does. Oh my God, Donald Trump.
It's like we get
They're
so
like,
off
you're saying can never be
topic.
president. I'm like, you be shocked. I feel like 100% I'm convinced he could be.
It's
I mean,
America is. It's like it's America. It's like people still go to his rallies. That is enough proof that America needs to be worked on.
yeah. It's a mess out there.
It is a mess.
Oh. What else are we?
I think we're almost out of time.
Yeah, it was a good talk.
It was.
We went all over the place, but that's poetry.
I mean, poetry does that. It goes all over because poetry is life. So you take everything and you word vomit it out.
Yeah,
One of my
you-
favorite phrases.
Exactly.
And I mean, that's life.
Yeah, you throw it back, you throw it up, and you look at it a little bit, you poke at it a bit, you deconstruct it for all its economic and social policies, and then you come out a better learned person, hopefully.
It's like knock on wood. Learn enough not to vote for Trump.
Gosh. Okay, so that was great. Thank you, Nicole.
Well, thank you for having me. I look forward to listening to more of your shows eventually.
Yeah, and hopefully we'll have some other poets to come on and read their poetry, or we'll read more poems, etc. Talk about it. Talk about life. Talk about poetry, movies.
It's like horror.
Yeah. So exactly. So make sure to visit our channel on YouTube, DMG ATL. This has been Kelly Barraza and Nicole Matahari.
Yay.
Yeah. Thank you so much, and come back next week.
Yay.